can set in here. So welcome to the Climate Teacher Ed webinar hosted by the Institute for Science and Math Education at the University of Washington in Seattle. I'm Philip Bell. I'm a professor of education here at the university. I direct the Institute, and I'm joined by my fabulous colleague, Deb Morrison, a research scientist with our Institute and a climate justice learning designer and advisor.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This webinar is a series in an activity of a new effort called the Climate Teacher Ed Collaborative. The collaborative is a teacher education initiative dedicated to helping future teachers learn to engage youth in community climate justice projects and in critical civic participation in response to the climate crisis. In this monthly webinar series, we will talk with experts who can help us all think about how teacher education can help accomplish that.
We are in our 5th webinar. We hope that the series is a valuable resource for teacher educators and educators writ large to focus their instruction on just response to climate crisis and environmental injustice. We encourage you to check out the professional learning resources that we've been accumulating through our activities. They're shared in the climate learning section of the stemteachingtools.org website, which was just dropped in chat. And for those of you joining us today, we love a rollicking chat. So if you have questions or comments or insights, we encourage you to kind of post those as we go along through the chat. If you'd like to post a question to us, it's a little bit easier for us to see it if you post it to the Q&A functionality in Zoom.
I'm grateful to live and work in the unceded ancestral and current homelands and territories of the Saanich peoples on Stayas Island in Pender Island, British Columbia, Canada.
Yeah, and the University of Washington operates on, and I live on, the lands of the Lushootseed speaking peoples, the Coast Salish peoples, who identify as the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Suquamish, Snoqualmie, Tulalip, and Puyallup peoples. We work in our efforts to uphold and take action in support of tribal sovereignty throughout what we do. This certainly extends to matters of educational sovereignty for the purposes of cultural continuance and Indigenous lifeways. There are specific dimensions of that relate to ecological justice and climate justice. And so please explore the broader resource collection and stay tuned for some future events that are upcoming that will go directly in that direction. We're so thrilled to have Dr. Alexis Patterson Williams and Dr. Salina Gray with us today. Welcome.
I am very privileged to introduce them. So first we'll start with Dr. Alexis Patterson Williams, who is an associate professor at the University of California, Davis. Her research lies at the intersection of equity studies, social psychology, and science education. She explores equity issues that arise from social hierarchies when students work together on group projects in science, as well as teacher development of practices that support equitable and robust interactions between students that can deconstruct implicit and explicit language and literacy hierarchies. Learned a ton from her. And then we have Dr. Salina Gray, who received her doctorate from Stanford University in curriculum and instruction in science education. Her work focuses on transformative science education. Salina currently teaches 7th and 8th grade science in the Moreno Valley Unified School District and serves as a member and facilitator on the California Teacher Association Human Rights Cadre Committee for Social and Emotional Learning. She and Dr. Williams co-developed the holistic science pedagogy framework we will be learning about today. And I am like super privileged to have a geeky middle school science teacher here with me too. All right.
Likewise, welcome to you both. So as we were planning for today, Alexis and Salina wanted to actually model part of their framework in the webinar itself with a specific kind of launch. So I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Gray to open us up and get us started. So off to you, Salina.
Thank you, everyone. So we're going to go on and start with a grounding and kind of a check-in and a grounding. And so right now, I'd like to do something called the weather report. So I want you to think about the state of your personal atmosphere. This is something that I do regularly in my class. And so a few words describe the state of your atmosphere. So just pay attention, notice what's going on. What are you feeling? How are you feeling? This is a way of thinking about your current stress level. You can use weather words or you can use other words. So just pay attention and notice, and go on and drop in the chat the words to describe your personal weather report. We'll give you a few seconds. So go on and drop those words in the chat and let's see what folks are saying. I see blue sky and a chance of rain, sunny with some clouds and possible thunderstorms. Blue skies, chance of rain, blue skies, but that chance of rain. Thank you, keep that weather coming. Cloudy with a chance of rain or maybe sun, gusty high winds. Oh, such beautiful weather words. And again, this weather is a metaphor, right, for our feelings. We're kind of all over the place, which is actually a very realistic depiction of how we feel. I see sunny, humid, I see cloudy. And so I thank you for wherever you are in your weather, stormy, sun breaks, remembering that the weather, like our moods, like our stress levels, change. And so we embrace them all, right? And so wherever you are, on this next slide, we're going to try a grounding activity. And so notice what's happening in your body, right? Are there any physical sensations that you associated with this weather? So if you said stormy with sun breaks, what's happening in your body that makes you feel stormy with the sun break? What does that look like? What does that feel like, right? How's your heartbeat? Where is your breath in your chest? Okay, are your muscles tight? Just kind of pay attention and notice. And we're not judging, right? We're collecting data because we love data and all data is helpful, okay? And so wherever you are, even if you are lightning with humidity, thank you. Philip got us started saying, noticing tense muscles, a bit jittery, okay? Is your breath deep or shallow, okay? Are your palms sweaty? Is your mind racing? All of these are sensations. I see some more muscle tension, okay? And so as you're taking this data, there's a second question that is so important. This is the crucial question. And that question is this current weather serving you at this moment? So if you have a plan to go to the beach and go swimming now, is a tornadic thunderstorm with lightning the best weather for that trip, okay? And only you know, because only you know what your current experience is. So as you are sitting here at 11:10 my time on this webinar, is your response, we call it, your weather, the right weather for right now? And so just kind of take a minute and think about that, right? I love, someone said their mind is racing, but they're trying to bring it back to the present, okay? It's mostly serving you, but has a potential to throw you off. Because there are times where we want sunny, hot weather, and there's other times where we want that. You know, if we're having a drought, right, we want torrential rain, okay? So don't judge yourself. Weather is not to be judged. Your mood is not to be judged. The question is it serving you right now? And so wherever you are in your practice, or in your weather, we'd like to offer a practice. And so I'd like you to look around yourself and find an object you can hold in your hand. It can be anything if it's available to you. I'm gonna grab this pencil, and I'd like you to just hold it and put your attention there. So just picking it up, my breath changed, right? Because my attention went from my body to this object, and that's really what we are trying to do. We're trying to take your attention from your weather to this object. And so just hold this object in your hand. You can do it with your eyes open, closed. You can turn the object over and just take about 10 seconds. Notice the shape, the color. Perhaps it makes sounds. Just kind of focus any energy that you can, any attention onto that object. And then when you're ready, go on and take a breath, and we're going to come back into community. And then we'd like you to notice how that was for you. Did you notice any shift, any change as we move to this next slide? Did you notice anything? And the change might be subtle. It may not be anything dramatic. And then if you'd like to share, I see someone, thank you. You all are stellar. Someone said, sharpened my attention. Thank you, Charles. Any other comments that you love to make? We love to see them. It may be, Salina, this was a waste of my time and nothing happened. That's good data. So you know when you're feeling hurricanes, picking up an object is not going to help. So that's good data. Philip said their breathing slowed down. Someone said a sense of ease, more relaxed and attentive. And if you didn't feel any of this, if it got you more keyed up, that's good data, because now you know this might not be something that works for you, okay? So we thank you, we welcome you again. Thank you so much. Well, we appreciate you being here. And so of course we want to know. I love these comments. Thank you so very much, everyone. And so we're going to move forward. I love it. I feel mindful. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to pass it over back to Philip.
That's fabulous. Like I happen to have an object here that like was a gift, that was a handmade gift in recognition of some time together on a project. And so I don't know, it's like the memory actually helped calm me down of like, oh yeah, that person was expressing gratitude for something. So I don't know, thank you for the gift of that exercise. We have a series of things that we kind of want to open up with you and Alexis just around the amazing work that you've been up to. We wanted to start with a pretty broad framing question about just how you define community climate justice education. And I know you have your holistic science pedagogy framework to share with us that's described in the article that's been shared in chat, and we'll share it again. But we're going to hand it back to you, and you'll just open up how you think about the work and how you focused it.
Thank you. Alexis, are you able to move that slide?
Oh, I thought I did. Okay, I apologize. Oh, I moved it on my side, but not on yours. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Listen, I get the gift of working with Salina all the time. And when she was able to pop on, I was like, Salina, you do the grounding activity because I need some grounding this morning. My 13-month-old was up at 5 a.m. and I just was not quite present. And so I appreciate the gift of being grounded. So giving thanks to my sister, scholar, and colleague, Salina, for that task. And thank you all for coming. And thank you, Phil and Deb, for the question. I think for us, we put these quotes up here because so much of what community climate justice education means for us is really grounding in people. And we felt like these quotes really captured that. So the first quote says, environmental justice means that no community should be saddled with more environmental burdens and less environmental benefits than any other. The next quote says, if we talk about the environment, for example, we have to talk about environmental racism, about the fact that kids in South Central Los Angeles have a third of the lung capacity of kids in Santa Monica. And for me, this is very grounding. I taught in the East Bay in Northern California and a few cities up. There were a lot of gasoline plants. And so the children in that community have higher rates of asthma. And so community climate justice for us is grounded in people. It's grounded in community. It's grounded in an understanding that in our fight to preserve our earth, that we don't focus on the non-human aspects of climate change and care more about ice caps and polar bears, which we do care about, more than we care about the people that we share the earth with. And so because certain communities don't always have, are not always valued in the same way, for us, community climate justice is about recognizing the disparate impacts on marginalized communities. That's a huge part of what it means for us. It's about having a collective awareness and understanding that communities, thinking about indigenous communities, that they have a legacy of stewardship a legacy of community climate justice. And for us, it's a lot about trying to be in partnership and bringing that awareness into, for us as educators and teacher educators, into the classroom space, and broadening that awareness and sharing that awareness with our students and learning from them and with them the ways that they are agents of climate justice in their communities. So really it's about restoring all voices to this conversation, and recognizing that voices have been present for centuries, reconnecting relationship with natures and others. And then, well, I'll stop. Salina, do you want to bring in and come in?
Oh no, I love what you said, and I'll just address this idea we have of redressing. And we talk in the holistic science pedagogy about being aware of and undoing harm, restoring, right? Restoration. And so part of that for me as a classroom teacher working with middle schoolers, it's not enough to just teach them, right, about global warming and climate change, right? Because that's not inherently just, right? The justice part comes in, as Alexis said, when we engage students, when we empower them, right, to see themselves as climate activists because they live on this planet, they're experiencing all of the extreme weather, right? They're experiencing all of the impact of climate change or of global warming and climate change, right? And if they're not experiencing it directly, they're learning about it, they're hearing about it, right? And so we are doing them an injustice if we are not providing a space where they can not just be fixated on the content of environmental science or climate change and global warming. It really is about bringing in sort of a liberatory lens, right? Where they see this information as useful along with their world experiences and putting all of that together to talk about transformation. And that transformative piece is what we call the climate justice education. We're aware that there's this, global problem. And even though we're only kids, right, we're 7th and 8th graders, we still have a part to play in thinking about, discussing, analyzing, and envisioning a different kind of world and what does that look like, right? And so that's a very different idea from saying, well, my kids need to get the fundamentals first. My kids don't write very well. They can't read very well. So why would I'm going to give them only the fundamentals. And that's a way of silencing them, to be perfectly honest. It's a way of taking away their agency. And it's certainly a deficit idea that we have to only give the fundamentals to kids of color or kids who live in poverty because they don't have that kind of education, right? It's completely the opposite of climate justice or justice in education in general. And so that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Alexis.
Phil, did you want to jump in? Otherwise, we'll keep going. We can jam all day.
I love it so much. And I have so much to say, just wanted to connect the dot. There was a point, kind of a reminder last month's webinar that was, activism is learning, which I hear you also naming. It's agency and activism for all students is actually fundamental to then learning to engage in response. And so I just wanted to connect that dot and just resonate to the image that you're putting on the table. So thank you for that.
And one other thing, Salina, I think you're naming too that, when we're looking at educational justice, it's interwoven with climate justice. And I think that's something that we really need to stress, that there are these different aspects of justice that are actually intersectional in this kind of work. So thank you for that.
Awesome.
Fantastic. So when we talk about our approach to this work, we have developed this framework for holistic science pedagogy. And for us, this pedagogy really was birthed out of our collective research, our collective experience as classroom teachers, and thinking about how do we do transformative work? How do we do all of the things that Salina just described? How do we give our students agency? How do we empower them? How do we go beyond the fundamentals when that is the narrative that often shapes our educational atmospheres. So how do we push against that grain in the classroom as educators? And so for us, we talk about the holistic science pedagogy. For us, it is a transformative and just, it's a liberatory approach to teaching. It is what we call both a teacher and student-centered approach, meaning that we center the students and their liberation and their agency and their empowerment in our approach to teaching, but it is very much about making a commitment as a teacher. And the word commitment there is very important because a lot of times we hear about teacher beliefs and we want to move past beliefs, because we can all believe that everyone deserves justice and that every child deserves an equitable and high quality and rigorous education. But we need beliefs to align with actions. And so when we are committed to something, this is where the action comes in. And so we ask teachers who are interested in this approach of teaching to make 5 commitments. A commitment to an ever-developing self-awareness, which is really about cultivating a critical consciousness, and we'll talk more about them soon. A commitment to science and its practices, so really understanding the nature of science and teaching accordingly. A commitment to science as a transformative agent, so not teaching science in these fundamental ways, but really thinking about the transformative power of science and as a tool to make science meaningful for our children and their community. It's a commitment to students' social and emotional well-being, that we are not teaching this objective, content area that means that we neglect and ignore the feelings of our children and our own feelings in this space, which is why we grounded ourselves in the weather. Because if we're cloudy and torrential, that energy is coming with us into the classroom. And if our babies are cloudy and torrential, that energy is impacting the atmosphere of the classroom. How do we teach in that? We have to acknowledge it. We have to acknowledge it and do something about it. And then the 5th one is a commitment to utilize restorative practices, which is thinking about how do we mend and repair and bring people with us in the work. So those are the 5 commitments, big picture. We wanted to go through and talk about each of these commitments briefly, but I wanted to pause there to open up space for Salina or Deb or Phil, or if anyone wanted to comment just there.
I would like to, Deb or Phil, because if not, we can go. There are 3 we're gonna focus on today. They're all relevant, but for what we're doing today and for sake of time, we have 3 we'd like to really focus in on. So if Phil or Deb don't have a question or comment here, we can.
Yeah, I would say the only thing I would name is just that article I think is a really good example of like the system of these, that, while you're focusing on the 3 today, this system of the 5 together, they work together. And so really focusing on that's been really helpful.
Thank you.
I think, later in the hour, we'll get to some details of how people find their way into this work, and we'll talk a bit about what you've learned about that. I kind of really was struck by this, we need to move beyond beliefs. We need beliefs to align with action. So like, we all have roles to play in conversations where teacher learning maybe gets framed as a belief, structure. And we could actually say, well, what are the enacted commitments related to those beliefs? Like, we could actually like really try to hold ourselves to that as we engage in the work, in all the various contexts where it shows up. So I really love that point.
Absolutely, thank you. And thank you, Alexis, for so beautifully laying out these 5 commitments. And so on this first slide, you see the commitment to self-awareness. And we start with that. The 5 commitments are not linear by any means, right? But we do, when Alexis and I were developing this model, we took a slightly different approach. Often in teacher ed, right? At any level of teacher ed, it's always about what the student needs, right? How can you best teach students? How can you best manage the class? What do students need? What do students need? I cannot think of a time in my many, many years of schooling that I was asked what I needed to be able to show up and be this amazing, this stellar teacher. And so we said, you know what? Everything begins with us. As Joni Mitchell says, everything comes down to you. And I don't know if that's what she meant, but that's my interpretation, that how I'm showing up in the classroom really sets the tone. It can determine the weather. And so we believe wholeheartedly that to do this kind of transformative, really radical work, it has to start with a very deep, internal, critically conscious, reflective, almost like excavation process of ourselves. So you add, thinking about who am I as a human, not even who am I as a teacher, who am I? What are my beliefs? What things have shaped me, right? How can I be conscious when I'm self-reflecting? Not just reflecting and saying, did I get to do the good job explaining greenhouse gases? How did my kids do when I asked them to talk about, sinks, for example, or, alternative energies? But really, how am I feeling? What is inspiring me? What motivates me? What frustrates me? How does my personal history show up today, right? Did I get the therapy I needed? Did I do yoga? Did I meditate? Did I walk? Am I in counseling? What do I need? Because we all have things to heal from. And so if we're trying to encourage students to become these agents of change and agents of transformation, I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be hard to be authentic and vulnerable if you have not done that work on yourself. So that's that first commitment. Alexis, anything you want to add to this before we go to the next commitment?
I would just add to that part of that excavation work is thinking about our various identities that we bring into the space. Because the histories that we have, those identities come with power, they come with status, they come with narratives, and then we don't live in isolation, or maybe we have lived in isolation with people like us. And so then that means that we have narratives about other people. And so how have we done that deep digging and reflecting in the same way that we picked up that object and we looked at it and we sat with it and we made some noticings? We have to make some noticings about the narratives that we are bringing with us in the classroom, because they shape what we see. They shape how we make sense of it. When we see a child with their head down in the back, what is our narrative? And that narrative is going to be impacted by, is that a little Black boy in the back? Do I have beliefs that Black people don't do science? So maybe he's not engaged. He doesn't think this is important. He doesn't care. Or if it's a child, maybe a child who is from a stereotypical group that we believe does science, so a white or an Asian boy, then maybe he's just tired today. Maybe he had a hard time at home. How do our narratives shift based off of the different identity markers that we see? And we have to do that kind of critical excavation work. And we may not like the narratives that are within us, right? But Beverly Tatum talks about us as being smog breathers. So we don't have to judge ourselves because they are there. We cannot resist the fact that we are in a society where these various hierarchies and prejudicial narratives exist. But our work is to then do the unpacking, do the redressing, to move beyond the smog, as Beverly Tatum would say, that we have breathed in around these prejudices, so that we don't carry that into the classroom and it doesn't impact our students. So I think that's the other piece of the critical excavation that we have to do as teachers.
Thank you, Alexis. Beautifully said. And that actually transitions so well to this next commitment that we are going to just kind of briefly touch on today, right? So you have this commit as an educator, right? A climate justice educator. You have this commitment to science, to your self-awareness, right? And then, of course, there's that commitment to science and its practices, okay? And that's when we talk about the fundamentals. We would not argue, we're not saying throw out the fundamentals. We're not saying don't teach science. We're not saying, you know, don't teach sort of the processes of how we do science or the science and engineering practices. Absolutely not. We're saying it's not an either or, right? It's a both and. And so paying attention to the social, emotional, the restorative, the sort of justice, transformative pieces, but also we want to make sure that we are giving our students the content, right? If we are talking about climate justice specifically, it's going to be very difficult for students to engage meaningfully and agentically in any efforts, right, to address climate change if they don't understand the science of climate change, okay? And so that is another very important component, one of the commitments. You have to be committed to the science, right? Being very revolutionary, transformative minded does not let us off the hook from also making sure that we are giving students rigorous experiences with the content and process of science in the classroom, as well as understanding, I always call it the sort of timeline of science, right? Discovery, inquiry do not exist in a vacuum, right? There's this timeline that goes back, I'd say millennia, right? Folks have been doing science since day one, trying to make sense of the world around them. Before we had written text, people were observing the world around them, coming up with explanations, making decisions, creating things based on those understandings. The understandings have changed as we've learned more, but don't get it twisted. Folks are born scientists, as I tell my students. The first time you see something and you're like, how does that work? What is that? Why is that happening? You are a scientist, okay? And so that's part of this commitment to science. A commitment to science as not something exclusive to one or two or three groups or types of people, right? That science is for all of us, and it's always been for all of us, okay? And that also includes understanding the role of science in society, historically, even to more contemporarily, okay? Alexis, any thoughts on this one or anything you want to share? Okay, thank you. And so then this other piece, when we're talking specifically about climate justice, we thought that it would be good to just briefly touch on science as a transformative agent, right? And that again goes to this idea of teaching science as sort of traditional, more traditional science, right? I know I learned it as a bunch of random, disparate facts about things, formulas, very structured labs, that kind of cookbook lab thing happening. That was not transformative science, right? I mean, my teachers did the best they could, making sure that I was learning the content of science and how to do science things that I should do in a lab, but there was nothing transformative. And the reason I know this is because I never thought about taking anything I learned in any of my science classes and taking it outside of the class and using it to read the world, as Fede mentions, to really not even to understand the world. It wasn't even a clear connection between what I was learning and making even sense of the world, let alone a connection between class and transforming the world. And so part of this commitment is really creating a space and presenting experiences where science can be seen and used as an agent of transformation. And that transformation has multiple levels. It can be an individual, personal transformation, right? Thinking about the things you eat, thinking about the things you grow, right? That could be transformative, thinking about your mental, physical, emotional health. But it could also be, larger. It could be community, it can be global, okay? So that is what we're talking about, the potential of science to change the world.
Wow. So I encourage people to follow up on all of the resources that will be shared later to kind of keep sinking in. But I'm really taken by a couple of the dimensions you've put on the table. So at some level, like a critical stance orients us to the problematic history and ongoing forces of science that cause hierarchy and stereotyping and like problematic, inequities and oppressions. But at the same time, like it can be a source of transformation and insight and like moving towards justice. And so like just to kind of name like those two valences of science that you're pulling into focus. And I don't know if you have more to say about that. I know Deb is gonna follow up with an example in a second, but what are we kind of asked you to think about what are the implications of holding these commitments, and I think you're going to share a bit about that, and then we'll transition to an example that enacts them. But just wanted to like name that kind of beautiful like dimension of the framework.
Thank you, Alexis.
Thank you, Phil. I would just say, I appreciate you bringing that up because the two things can coexist, right? That science has done powerful things to uplift our community, to save our community. I mean, we think about the power of vaccines and historically, and then even present day. And then you think about also the ways that science has been used as a tool to perpetuate harm or has been developed in harmful ways. And so again, just that we can hold two things at once, and that's really what we're asking folks to do when you do this kind of critical transformative works, is that two things can be true at the same time. And we might feel that tension. And how do we authentically talk about that tension and the implications of it with ourselves and with our students? And we think both conversations have to happen. So implications, we often hear people when they're talking about liberatory critical work, we want to transform the system. We want to rage against the machine. And we always talk about, but the self-work is the first work. And so we talk about reformation of self as a first step towards transformation of the system. And then we also talk about the ways that science have specific and unique practices. And so how do we, again, empower our students with the tools, the unique ways of thinking, the unique skill sets and practices and habits of minds that really are important for reading the world and for thinking about how we might change, how we might understand the fact that it's 106 degrees where I am right now. What is going on, right? So science is a part of that sense making. And so how do we also think about teaching science in a way that doesn't create more harm? I think it's also important to recognize that when we're doing justice work, sometimes the very nature of the topic, sometimes the very nature of bringing up the fact that communities are disproportionately harmed can bring about harm. We were reading an article about a teacher who was teaching biology through cancer and showing how the community that she was teaching in, like there were higher rates of cancer and the medical support was poor, but that's real. So if I'm teaching that to my students and that's their community, that means that my aunt might have died of cancer. So how are we also aware that when we're teaching these hard truths, that it may have a real impact, a social and emotional impact on our students? And so how do we also teach in a way that doesn't cause more harm while we're trying to understand the inequities and the injustice? And that these are tools that we can use to transform our world, and that our students are the ones that we are trying to work in community with to do that work. I went through these quick, but I want to allow time for more discussion.
Yeah, these pieces are so important to think about together because each of them has, and collectively as well, they have implications for how we as educators work with our students, work with our communities. And yeah, I agree completely that reformation of self is, you have to have that strong core to be able to figure out what is the work that you need to do and be honest about it. Yeah. I know that you are going to open up an example of your holistic science pedagogical model. And so maybe as we work through the example, we'll come back to these implications and think through them a little bit, because I think it'll be really helpful to have a really concrete example on the table. So if you want to go ahead and do that, that would be really amazing to see.
So we brought two examples. So I'm going to talk through our example, the first one quickly because it is in the article, and maybe highlight some things that Salina and I were thinking as we crafted this article as it pertains to the 5 commitments. So I believe Corey dropped in the chat earlier the link to this lesson that Salina and I co-designed on climate justice. In this lesson, the goal of the lesson was really to allow students to have the opportunity to engage with different graphs, different materials, to use as evidence to explain the uneven effects of climate change. So really trying to get at the heart of climate justice. And the guiding question reflects that aim. So in what ways are the patterns and trends associated with climate change impacting diverse communities around the world? And so a couple of the activities that are part of this lesson is one, doing a stations activity where we provided groups of students with a variety of data around the effects of climate change on different regions in the world. And so I'm going to quickly go through these. These slides will be made available depending on your age. This is a secondary lesson, but depending on your age, high schoolers, it'd probably be more appropriate to maybe show them charts like these that are a little bit more sophisticated in nature. And so with our stations activity, we asked our students to review the graphs, to answer the different questions that we have below here, thinking about what is the graph measuring, what do the colors represent, and can they describe the trends and patterns? So they'd be working in small groups as they rotated to the different stations that would have a single piece of data, because graphs are dense material that really have to be dissected. And so you would want to think about even ways that would be appropriate to provide students with the skills, thinking about science and its practices, the tools to be able to make sense of the material. And then we'd ask them to go back to the guiding question. So every time you get a new piece of data, how does that layer into helping you think about the ways and patterns and trends that are associated with climate change and how that might impact the communities around the world. And after they went through that activity, we would ask them, after they went through the stations, we'd also provide them with additional information to kind of deepen their understanding. We would provide them with the prompt. And I think this part is important because even we are often confronted with misinformation, disinformation, and people who believe that. And so how do we engage in conversation with folks who maybe have a different understanding than the one that we have? So we have this claim, evidence, reasoning handout that we ask the students to do, which is, you've overheard a friend make the following claim: climate change has a universal impact on communities. And what is your response? So we ask them to construct an argument using the evidence. The evidence will come from the stations activity as well as some of the other materials that we gave them. And they would be asked to make an argument from that. And then we close out with some critical reflection questions, which is where we get at the restoration and thinking about really the criticality of this. So given this data, who was harmed and who will be harmed? What was the cause of the harm? Who's responsible? And what ideas do you have about what can be done to prepare or prevent? And what might justice look like? And can there even be justice? And so we really want them to not just grapple with the information, but to think about the broader implications of what they're seeing and who it's impacting, and is the people that it's impacting the people that are creating the harm. And so we really tried to weave in the different commitments here, but I want to just say one thing about the commitment to an ever-developing self-awareness. When we created this, there were videos and articles that we just didn't include. because we were concerned that people that haven't done the kind of critical work would see this and maybe use these videos in ways that are not appropriate, to have continued deficit narratives about communities that would perpetuate the harm. And so it's funny because actually we got a very nasty letter back about this lesson, and how and so it really kind of proved this point about the need to do this kind of self-critical work in order to be able to present this in ways that are authentic and that can really support the kind of critical conversation that we presented students with at the end.
And
Rena,
so,
do you want to talk through the second example?
yes, so thank you, Alexis. So something else that I've introduced this year with my class were the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so we have something in the chat. Corey's going to post a link where you can find the 17 goals. You can read information and data on them. And this speaks to, actually, I think I saw someone raise the question in the Q&A. It popped up, this question of hope, right? Because this work could definitely, this information can overwhelm, can depress, can create anxiety, right? This is pretty heavy. We're talking about, a global problem, that's affecting everyone, right? At all levels. And so in our class, the way that I guess we address the hope is really about student empowerment. So this idea, like from day one, I tell my students, you are scientists, you are here because we all live on this planet and there are things that need a fixing, and we're going to work together. We're going to get the information, the knowledge, the skills, the heart to really be a part of the solutions. And so that's where the hope comes in. Setting students up with this idea, with this belief that they literally can transform the world. And so on this next slide, what you see are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And so I spend time going through each goal. We discuss the goal. The students talk about what each of these means. We talk about the history of the goals and why leaders, world leaders, thought that these were the 17. And the idea is that these are universal. So if we could meet, right, all 17 of these goals, then the idea is this world would be completely transformed. And their goal initially was meet these goals by 2030. And so one of the first questions I asked my students is, do you think we're going to reach these by 2030? And overwhelmingly, they're like, no way, when we start, right? Before we get into talking about what role we play, how can we help globally, this global movement to meet these goals. And so what we'd like to share today is some of the student work around climate action. And so students, climate action really talks about the urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. So of course, in here, you see that commitment to science and its practices. So students have to know what fossil fuels are. They have to know what climate change is. They have to know about greenhouse gases and what global warming is. So that definitely requires this commitment to, teaching the fundamentals of environmental science or climate science, okay? So that's one component. And so we do get to spend some time making sure students are well-versed enough to be able to go beyond just that science to thinking transformatively. And so what students are asked to do is, after exploring and studying all of the goals, they are required to pick one goal that really resonates with them. Quite a few students, I was excited, picked climate action. And so for the first part, they had to create a poster that represented their goal. And then there were some components that they had to be sure to include. They had to have some visuals that represent their goal. They had to explain what the goal is, why they think it's important, what they believe some obstacles might be to reaching that goal, okay? and then some potential things that people could do. So I'd like to highlight a couple of parts from this one. So this was climate action. And so you can see this student talked about what they thought climate action meant. And this is authentic student work. So these are middle schoolers, these are 7th and 8th graders. So you're gonna see some spelling errors, but we felt it was important for you to see what the student work looked like. Sorry, y'all. You all know these announcements. And so you can see students share climate action is important because it leads to greater prosperity and the real world and better lives for all, okay? And so now on the next highlight, where they're asked to talk about the obstacles. And what I love about this student is they talk about climate change denial. And this is not something that was a part of our lessons because the kids had to go take the goal, do some research on the goal on their own. And this student in their research found out that there are people who deny climate change. And they noticed that that was an obstacle, okay? So this, again, very exciting to get this particular poster. And it's not unique. The students really got into and enjoyed this. And I think it was because their agency was, you get to select which goal you'd like to focus on. So can we go to the next one, Alexis? And then the final part, what we could do to help, right? And so these were posters they had to create. So I'd like to share another poster real quick, just another example from a student. And here again, you can see the parts that are blown up for this one. They said that climate action, that we needed to take urgent action to combat climate change. And then when they talk about that second part, what not doing, what would happen if we don't take action, right? And why it's important. And again, this idea that people think climate change isn't important or isn't real. So students on their own, right, are going out and learning and understanding and realizing the importance of this issue. And then what we can do, and they give a list of things we can do. And so for this final part, after they've completed these beautiful posters, on the next slide, I wanted to include sort of the language arts component. So I love interdisciplinary work. I love science literacy. And so students had to answer 5 or 6 questions about their posters, about their research. And so I just gave 2 examples that shows students' answers to 2 questions. The first question they had to answer was, why did they choose this goal? And you can see that students were able to beautifully articulate why this issue was important to them. One student said, because they want to see their kids and future generations to appreciate the earth, okay? And another said, because it affects everyone around the world, and addressing this would give everyone a better world. And then another question that they had to answer was whether or not they found this project meaningful. Because it was important. I didn't want to assume that they did. And so you can see in both cases, students had really personal reasons for why they found it useful. The first one talks about her love of earth, and she connected it to her time with her father, out in nature, okay? And then the second student talked really about the transformative, the transformative aspect, right? Learning about climate change and its impact and how they can fix it. So this is the way that we create hope, that we generate hope, is to empower and inspire our students to say, hey, there are these things that are going on that are bigger than us, right? But there's something we can do about it. There's something we can do. We can be a part of it.
That's awesome. That is really awesome. And it's something that we're starting to see more and more as people engage in climate change education, is that the idea is, how do we actually engage in this type of agency or empowerment in the context of youth? What about how educators are taking this up, how others are taking this up, and what kind of guidance you might provide to folks doing this similar kind of work?
I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to be very brief.
Yep.
I'm excited. I'm very excited about these UN Sustainable Development Goals. And my hope is that we can ground our entire curriculum in these goals, because everything that we teach, looking at, our units, every single unit, every topic in every unit connects to one or more of these UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so I tried to pitch that idea to folk, and they were just like, there was so much pushback. And I got a lot of, that's really cool, but that seems like a lot. And so that's kind of where I am, because I'm very committed to this. And I believe that it's a powerful tool. These goals are a powerful tool to use in our classrooms, to use with our science curriculum. And so my hope is that I'm going to be able to convince folk to consider how we can ground, because when we talk about, we want science to be real world and relevant and meaningful, I can't think of anything better than this document, right? These goals that folks around the world are working in different ways to try to meet these goals. And so that's kind of where I am, is really trying to figure out how I can scale this up and scale this across. Alexis, any thoughts that you have?
No, I think what you said is powerful, Salina, and what I would really encourage people that are that are doing this work is to find the thing that fires you up. For Salina, it's the UN Sustainable Goals, and I do think they're wide-reaching and broad. And let's all get on the boat with the UN Sustainable Goals. But if that's not the thing that fires you up, the thing is, you have to be committed and authentic in order for you to go in hard and to do the kind of deep work. So I really would push folks. This is a trendy topic, and I'm glad it's trending, but let's try to connect with it in meaningful ways so that we can stay committed to it and teach it in the kind of robust ways that are going to bring transformative power and agency to our students.
Yeah, I really kind of love both of those dimensions into the work. Like, one is, like, we were talking a bit in the preparation for this session today about, like, the UN goals, and like it would be really great to actually have a network that can mobilize around them and through them and resource each other and like learn from each other. And so, like, there is like that specific move, but like finding the platform that does inspire you and your community to be locally engaging is like the broader strategy, Alexis, that I hear you naming. I wanted to like highlight one piece of the amazing work you shared and connect it to a need, and then we'll like have you share some resources. At a recent Aspen Climate event, there was a youth climate survey that was shared, showing that almost 90% of youth are actually very committed to engaging climate as an issue, but 2/3 of them don't know how to take action. And so at some level, education has this vital function to like close that action gap and to hold the kind of the critical justice frame that you're weaving into your commitments as we like bring youth into that space. So I just kind of wanted to connect that dot and like the need to actually have this. And a decade ago, there was a lot more hesitancy to talk about actions and responses and solutions, but we're not in a space where we can afford to not do that. I think it's just increasingly clear to a growing number of people. I'm going to ask you to share some resources just to kind of, part of what we do here is actually try to heavily resource people to like find their way forward. So maybe you want to put a little bit of a frame around this, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Powerful. I mean, we have to get actionable. We can't just talk about these things. So if you want to hear more, learn more about this work and use it as a framework to take action, if you want to learn more about the lesson that I talked about, the first example, the Connected Science Learning article link will do that for you. If you are interested in thinking more about that first step of reformation. Salina and I did a podcast with the Transformative Justice and Education Center at UC Davis, talking more about that first step. So click that link to access that podcast. Salina and I also did a couple of Facebook Live videos thinking about science as a transformative agent, and also weaving in the social emotional and thinking about students as addressing students' whole selves in classrooms and MGSS specific ways. And then lastly, for those who are interested in teacher education, Salina and I worked with a cohort of folks to think about how we might bring transformative justice focus into science teacher education. And we have some principles that we outlined at that link there. And then the Restorative Justice in Education book takes a disciplinary approach to thinking about how we might teach in restorative and just ways. And so Salina and I also have an article in that book, which is the images in the top right corner. So those are the resources that we're bringing to you today. And we're just so grateful for you all tuning in this Friday. And we thank you for your time and your attention and all the love in the chat.
Absolutely fabulous. Please join me in thanking Alexis and Salina for their amazing work and for sharing it with us today. We want to thank everyone who was able to make it. It's been such a complicated, heavy year. And so just wanted to kind of do a shout out to all of you for being able to kind of make time to be with us today. Salina, Alexis, really just like directly to you, like, thank you so much for like making time. People might know, but Dr. Gray is actually finishing her school year with her children today. And so like, the fact that this happened at the end of her school year and everything, like just so grateful.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. It's a pleasure to hear about this work. I've seen it develop over the years, and it's just so exciting to see how it's intersecting with all this climate work. We want to also just name that there's going to be a recording of this discussion. Will be posted on the climate learning section of the stemteachingtools.org website. And resources and papers will be linked from the notes in the video. So we will make sure that that gets all posted for everyone.
Yeah, we want to do a shout out to Corey Shee, who's behind the scenes supporting the webinar and helping it all go smoothly. So thank you, Corey. Please join us next month on Friday, July 8th from 11 to noon Pacific. We have 5 presenters coming to share their justice-centered work from the Chicago area. David Segura, Danny Morales-Doyle, Amy Levinston, Susan Nelson, and Karen Canales-Salas. So please join us for that. The justice-centered conversation will continue around a different NSTA article that they're opening up with us. And we hope to see you then. So take good care, everyone.